If you've been training the same way for a really long time, month after month, year after year, you're leaving a lot of gains on the table, a lot of size and strength on the table, okay? You absolutely need to be incorporating phases into your training, and that's what this video is going to be about. Because what gets you from beginner to intermediate is a little bit different than what gets you from intermediate to elite. And a lot of intermediate to advanced lifters tend to forget this very important principle of training, which is having phases to your training, having seasons to your training, and as a result, end up plateauing, end up even burning out. All right, so that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about the several phases you need to be incorporating into your training and how each one can benefit you because each one will build upon each other. So before we break down some of the main training phases you'll experience as an athlete, I think it's first important to discuss some of the reasons why you really do need to be incorporating training phases into your training. The very first one is probably the most obvious one, and that's adaptation fatigue, we can call it, I guess. Essentially, your body stops responding to what you're doing. And this isn't rocket science, guys. This is very, very simple. You present something to your body will adapt to it, right? But over time, it builds a tolerance to it. And that's a good thing. Like, that's what you want. You want your body to get better at doing the thing that you're trying to get it to be better at, okay? So it makes sense that eventually your body will catch up to this new stimulus you've presented to it. The problem is, once your body catches up, you only have so much time before it grows stale, before the stimulus basically doesn't really do much for you anymore. And that's what I mean by adaptation fatigue. At some point, your body will stop responding to the stimuli you present to it. And it may only take a small tweak or a small change in order to kind of reignite those adaptations. And a lot of times that's what you see in like peaking strategies and strength strategies where not much changes in the program. Each block builds upon one another, and it's just these small changes, let's say in volume, right? Like instead of taking top triples, you're taking top singles now. Sometimes that's all it takes. It's just that slight change. What I'm going to be talking about today are bigger changes, like actual phasic changes, but you get the idea, okay? There's this idea of adaptation fatigue you need to be aware of. Now, the next thing, which I think is a little bit more indirect and people may not notice it as much, but it's very real, is your central nervous system fatigue. When people talk about your central nervous system when it comes to your training, they're really talking about like the neural adaptation. So it's one thing to build muscle, right? But it's a whole nother thing to get your muscle to produce maximum amounts of force in a given movement. That's the neural adaptation. In short, your CNS can experience a very, very vast degree of side effects when it comes to pushing your training too hard for too long. Most common, burnout, like you literally just get completely burnt out of your training, don't have the motivation, don't have the energy, the drive, you just don't want to fucking do it. And again, you just feel like you've hit a wall. And this happens a lot, especially when you are a powerlifter or you compete in strength sports and you're constantly pushing your body to its max, all right? So you're constantly expecting your body to fire up and lift heavy ass weights all of the time. It's very difficult to sustain that for prep after prep after prep. And mind you, most powerlifting preps are like 12 to 16 weeks. Okay, so that's 3 to 4 months at a time. So if you have back-to-back preps, before you know it, you've done 8 to 12 months of just straight powerlifting preps. And so it's very easy for you to reach this state of essentially burnout and this state where your joints are basically broken. So that's what I would describe as like the CNS kind of fatigue, the CNS burnout. Now, the last thing I'll say here before we move on to the actual training phases themselves is just going harder in the gym, training more, that's not always an answer, okay? And that certainly doesn't necessarily define like a new training phase for yourself. So just keep that in mind, okay? If you find that you're hitting a plateau, if you find that you're burning out, if you find that your body's not really responding to what you're doing anymore, or you aren't intentional about having training phases implemented in your training, don't just decide, okay, well, I'm just going to go harder. I'm just going to do more. That's probably not the right answer, okay? And you'll very likely get hurt, / just really burn out and really put yourself into the floor, okay? So without further ado, let's actually cover some of these phases. I've listed some of these here. Now, the reason why I didn't put numbers to them is because I don't want you to think there's some sort of order to them, okay? What's important that you recognize is that each thing serves a distinct purpose. The other thing I want you to know is that these things will overlap, and sometimes they'll intertwine, meaning you'll focus on 2 or 3 at the same time in some way, okay? There's another thing here that I'm going to write in a second that I want you to be mindful of that kind of exists separate from this, that is also something you want to be thinking about, but this is basically it, okay? now I might be missing a couple general ones, but this is basically it. So I'm going to walk through each one. I'm not going to go too in depth, but I want to give you a general idea as to what each one means. That way you can start thinking about it as it relates to your training. Okay, so first we have recovery and health. Now, recovery and health phases are typically after you do a competition or after you have like a really intense bout of training where you found new PRs, or you push yourself in a crazy race or something. Okay, something intense. You need a phase where you really pull back and you focus on your recovery and your health. Okay, now what this might look like training-wise, it's tough to say. Every person is different, and depending on your style of training, depending on how long you've been training, depending on what you're dealing with, meaning how beat up you are, this will look way different, okay, for you versus for somebody else. So I don't want to get into all that stuff. Maybe we'll make a separate video on that. But just know that the recovery and health phase is really important. And if you have the time after a competition, especially if you're a powerlifter, if you have the time after a competition to do it, do it. This could be as small as 2 weeks. This could be as long as 2 months. It's really dependent on your macro training cycle, like your, I guess that's not the right word to use, but like your big picture. And that's actually really important to bring up. Like, you as a lifter need to be thinking about your training and really everything in your life, like as a big picture item. So what is it that we are truly trying to achieve in the long term? And then you can break that down into as small of steps or goals as you want to, but you really need to be cognizant of what are you training for? Right? And what does that timeline look like? Because that's how you'll then be able to decide where each of these kind of fit in, if that makes sense. So remember, like, the big picture, we have to put it on the board. Remember the big picture when thinking about all of this stuff and how this might work in. Okay, so now the next phase is accumulation and work capacity. Again, this is one that does not have to last that long, but really all you're doing is reconditioning yourself. So a lot of times, especially as a power lifter, you'll find yourself super out of shape after a competition because you've been doing lots of low volume work, heavy work. Okay, so your body you've been pushing all of your resources and all of your adaptation towards producing maximum amounts of force for one rep, pretty much, right? That's basically what you've been doing. So when it comes to your post-competition training, you're deconditioned. You've lost your fitness. Mind you, in order to grow muscle, and we're going to talk about this in a second, but in order to really build muscle in a hypertrophy or strength phase, you got to do some hard volume, right? But how can you do hard volume when you can barely do volume to begin with? And so that's what the accumulation and work capacity phase primarily is for. It's a time to take a step back and recondition yourself. So you're basically just doing a lot of light volume is essentially what you're doing. You're reintroducing the volume, not so much that you're going to absolutely kill yourself, but think of it as like a welcome/introduction to your off-season training or to like your hypertrophy training or your strength training, okay? It's an introduction to it. You're getting yourself back up to baseline, if that makes sense, from a work capacity perspective. And this is actually really important, okay? Because if you skip this, chances are you're just going to hit a wall. You're just going to burn out. Your body has lost its ability to be efficient when it comes to training lots of volume. And so you're probably just going to hit a wall if you were to jump straight from like a competition into hypertrophy phase or recovery health right into hypertrophy or something like that. Okay, so the next one, hypertrophy, it's exactly what it sounds like, build muscle. This phase is really where you focus on building muscle, right? Lots of accessories. You're not going to probably prioritize the top end of your main movements. You might still push the top end of your main movements, but it's not something you really care that much about. In other words, you're not looking to PR on your top end, all right? Unless you're trying to hit some crazy volume PRs or something like that. But remember, the goal here is just really putting your muscles through hell. Like, you really just want to stress the shit out of your muscles so that they have a reason to grow, especially grow bigger, okay? And then naturally, this will usually bleed into like a really good strength phase, and then that will go into your peak and your taper. The strength phase, obviously, you're focusing on building strength. Usually in this phase, a lot of the volume will drop, both in terms of like the number of accessories you do to the number of sets within each accessory you do, all that stuff. Then you have your peak where you're really focusing on maximum force production. You're peaking your body for that 1RM on the platform or for that whatever, your race day or whatever it is. So again, like, this isn't just specific to like bodybuilding, powerlifting stuff. Like, these phases, this is stuff that every athlete uses. Every person who trains is going to use in some way or another. They may add different phases to it, like a speed phase or a dynamic phase or something like that. Like, they may add stuff to it, absolutely, but you have to be mindful of the fact that there are phases to the training. Again, you are prioritizing different things at different times. That's all I'm trying to stress to you. Okay, so again, None of this necessarily has to go into order, but it is really helpful because what happens if you look at this from a big picture perspective and you break things down into phases with priorities, now each thing can build on top of one another, right? Instead of just doing the same shit year round, hoping for a different result, you actually have a systematic and strategic way of doing so. You're actually being intentional about building progress. And the one thing that I was talking about before that I wanted to throw up here that exists separately but's going on at the same time is, how do we want to put this? Work on weaknesses. Okay, now why is this important? And why does this exist separately? The reason why this exists separately, but it's kind of going on at the same time, is because there are certain phases where this might need to happen because it can't happen in other phases. For example, you probably don't want to work on your weaknesses during a peak because you want all of your resources allocated to one thing, right? Whereas when you're in a recovery health phase, maybe you can start thinking about, okay, where am I lacking in certain areas, right? When you're in a work capacity phase, again, same thing. Where am I lacking? What are some things I can devote energy to, devote resources to that might actually hold me back in terms of top end, but are really going to pay forward in the long run? Same thing with your strength phase, right? So these are things that I want you to be thinking about. Okay, I just want you to think about the big picture here and how this all intertwines with one another. In terms of like how all of this stuff actually gets set up in real time, we can make separate videos on this, but again, it's really going to depend on the person and your training experience and truly what it is you're trying to accomplish in that training phase. Okay, because sometimes, and this is where I'm going to blow your fucking mind with this. Sometimes phasic training happens with just one priority. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that real quick and then we can wrap this up. Sometimes you're going to focus on one priority, one training goal, and let's say it's building strength, right? But you're going to have phases even to that, okay? So you may have like, let's do it like this, blocks 1 to 2, blocks 2 to 4. Now this is a very elementary kind of dumbass way to say this, but we're going to see if I can pull this off here to explain it. Blocks 1 to 2, blocks 2 to 4, blocks 4 to 6. So you have 6 total blocks. So let's say 6 months of strength training. Remember, because you have to think about it like this way, like phases are kind of like priorities, like training priorities. So the primary phase is a strength phase, okay? And again, this is across 6 months. But mind you, you can push strength training for 6 months. It just probably shouldn't look the exact same across every single block or throughout all 6 months. You see what I'm saying? Because even within a phase, there's phases. Even within a phase, there's things you are prioritizing, things you're working on. So let's say blocks 1 to 2, you're prioritizing your secondary squat day. Okay? I don't even know what the fuck I was going to write. But let's say you're going to prioritize your secondary squat day, blocks 1 to 2, and your secondary squat day is a high bar squat, okay? Going into blocks 2 to 4, you've now built a pretty good secondary base. Now you're going to start to prioritize both a little bit. You're going to push that secondary, but you're going to push your primary, but not as hard as you were pushing on the first round. Then blocks 4 to 6, now you don't give a shit about your secondary necessarily. That's more of like a maintenance day. And now your primary day is what gets really pushed. In a way, what you've done is you've created phases within the block, right? Because phase 1 was we are focusing on the secondary here, and we are aligning our programming so that it makes sense for that. Phase 2, we're focusing on both. Phase 3, we're focusing on the primary. So you see what I'm saying? How like even within a certain phase of your training, you can have seasons even within that. And as a strength athlete, usually what we have to do, especially, I don't mean to like brag or anything like that, but I compete at the international level. I compete at an elite level, okay? I'm one of the best in the world at what I do. So what that means is I kind of almost always have to be ready. It's very rare that I don't have any crazy, big competitions coming up or big opportunities to total world records and stuff like that. So I kind of always have to be prepared. Now, my training will look very different than most people, but even for myself, right? Like, excuse me, most strength athletes, we're almost always in a hypertrophy / training phase. We don't really get too much time to spend in a recovery health or in a work capacity phase. Okay, we don't get that much time. And so because of that, we may have a prolonged strength phase that ebbs and flows and looks very different, block to block, or let's say, you know, every 2 blocks to every other 2 blocks or something like that. But we're always kind of like in the same phase, right? We're always trying to build strength. And so our training prioritizes that. Whereas some other athletes will have the opportunity to go like purely hypertrophy, do tons of volume, then taper that off, and then go right into a strength phase, and then eventually, you know, peak and stuff like that. They'll have this like really nice, like they'll have those true seasons to their training. It doesn't always have to be like that. Okay, so like I said, all I want you to be mindful of is that there needs to be distinct phases to your training, distinct purposes and priorities. And that's, maybe I should have mentioned that earlier, but having priorities when it comes to your training is really, really important because it aligns you. You're not worried about everything all the time. You're not trying to max out all the time, constantly be your strongest all the time. Instead, you're focusing on specific things that you know will pay forward later on. So before we wrap this up, I want to give you some key takeaways here. What I want you to do, if you're not following any sort of real program structure just yet, I want you to map out the next 12 weeks, the next 16 weeks, maybe even the next 6 months total, which I don't know how many weeks that would be, but 24 weeks, I guess. Map that out. Okay, map that out, because this is a great starting point for you to now be more strategic with your training and incorporate these phases. Now, like I said, you may not need to go through all of those phases we covered. There's some that we didn't cover that you may need to go over, but all that matters here is that you're being aware. You're becoming aware of the fact that you need to have priorities in your training. And then you can focus on each one. And again, by doing this, we are constantly pushing the envelope of progress. We're not stalling out. We're not experiencing any sort of adaptation fatigue. We have the opportunity to train certain weaknesses. We have the opportunity to focus on certain things during a certain season and then focus on others during others. And that's really, really important. Okay. So again, map it out. Look at, let's say like, let's take a 16-week phase, right? Or a 16-week program structure. So if you have 16 weeks, and let's say your goal was to get super jacked and super strong. Now you, in my opinion, have 2 options. You can either run like a power building split and training program where you kind of combine your bodybuilding and your strength work all in one, which I have programs like that. And I personally love to train like a power builder. But you get the best of both worlds, but you kind of lose out a little bit on both as well, right? Because you can't truly focus on one versus the other. Usually power building phases tend to be longer. So most athletes who power build for like 6 to 8 months at a time, sometimes even longer. And again, it's because the progress will come a little bit slower, but you are doing both at the same time. Okay, so it creates a balance. Now, the other way is to, again, have specific phases where you have hypertrophy-focused stuff and then your strength-focused stuff. And you don't try and do both at the same time. A lot of old school lifters used to train like that. Lots of untested guys tend to train like that. Yeah, either is fine, dude. Like either is fine. It's really just, it's up to you. And I recommend trying both ways. But let's just say we're going to go through a power building split. Okay, so we know that block 1, I'm going to label it like this because it's a little bit easier. 2, block 3, and block 4. So that's 16 weeks right there, right? Yeah. 16 weeks. So block 1, we're going to almost have like an intro. And what this is we're going to build our work capacity. So we're not going to, I misspelled that. So we're not going to go crazy with the loads that we use just yet. All right. So remember, this is about 4 weeks of this, and you are slowly increasing everything as you go. But again, it's not everything all at once. Now block 2 is real work. So this is where we have like a real, like, I'm going to put PB 1 as like our real work for our first block, right? So this is going to be that combination of a decent amount of volume with a decent amount of weight. Now, because you're power building, you can't go too crazy on the volume. You can go a little bit crazier on the weight because remember, this is still a strength program, but you get the idea. So this is like some real work right here. Maybe you're focusing on, I don't know, you're going to do 3s and 2s on your main movements, right? And that's what you're focusing on pushing. Now going into block 3, you're focusing on, let's say, like 2s and 1s. But again, mind you, this is PB2. Sorry, this looks so crazy and messed up. But These are like your two like really hard working phases, right? Or your hard working blocks. Now block 4, you're starting to shave off a lot of that volume, a lot of the accessories and stuff, because you want to prioritize the peak. You want to prioritize maximum force production. You're recovering for your main movements. That's all you really care about. You're moving away from variations, let's say. Maybe in the intro, you were doing some high bar work, some RDLs and stuff like that instead of like competition squat and deadlift. Whereas here, you started to transition, and now here, you're pretty much all competition movements across the board, right? So again, now you're working singles, so like ones and low accessory, we'll just say, you guys know what I mean. And this is the peak, right? So you see how even within these 16 weeks, we basically created phases in our training. That's how like microscopic it can get. And that's how I want you guys to think. Now, what I do really recommend in closing is that you think about the macro. Think about the big picture. Think about every single priority and phase of your training that could possibly exist. In other words, what can you really benefit from? And then plan it out and map it out and make sure, and this is the key takeaway right here. I'm going to get nice and close. Make sure that your training accurately depicts the priority. Meaning, if I just looked at your training, if I was a stranger and I looked at your training, the program that you wrote or your coach gave you, I need to be able to say, oh, I see what kind of phase you're in. That makes sense. Okay, cool. You are building work capacity right now. Oh, you know what? You've pulled back quite a bit. It looks like you're taking a nice big reset here. Interesting. Okay, and you're doing some interesting functional movements that powerlifter maybe normally wouldn't do. This must be a recovery health phase. Oh, you are. Oh my gosh, dude! You got 5x5s. You got 4x3s. You're working with 75 to 85%. This is a strength phase. You see what I'm saying? I want to be able to look at that and be able to know what phase you're in. Okay, so that's everything I have for you. Sorry if this video was a little too long. Happy to bring back the educational stuff. Let me know if you like this setup, by the way. And if you want me to kind of break down each major phase and how the programming might look in each major phase, let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next YouTube video. Peace.